This is the third part of the series of lectures under this title, The United States, Civil War, and the Triumph of Rome. Notice these two terms. At first you ask yourself, what does one have to do with the other? The Civil War is intimately associated with the triumph of Rome, in the United States and beyond, of course. We are going to resume the analysis of all the news that have been happening in the last few days that have to do with the whole question of the more than probable, I would say certain, civil war in the United States, but also with the triumph of Rome. The first of the news is from September 5. Harris leads Trump among Catholic voters, according to EWTN News poll. This is a Catholic news channel with a lot of weight in the United States. It was created by a nun who recently died. But what a clout this channel has become. And well, you see, polls are popping up practically every day, saying who is ahead and in what place. But in this case, the poll is taken directly among Catholic voters. How can this be? Haven't we seen that Catholic voters are theoretically totally opposed to abortion, etc., etc.? Well, there are different views among them. And there are people who consider that the most important thing is not the issue of abortion yes or abortion no, but the issue of the economy. And that is the basis for a large percentage of these votes that go precisely in that direction.
According to the results of a new EWTN News/Real Clear Opinion research poll, 2 months before the U.S. presidential election, Vice President Kamala Harris leads among Catholic voters over former President Donald Trump. The poll, conducted August 28-30, surveyed 1,000 Catholics and has a margin of error of about 3 percentage points. Catholic voters, like the majority of the electorate, see the economy as by far the most pressing issue facing the country and oppose sex reassignment surgeries for minors and transgender males competing in women's sports. They are divided on the question of who should set policy on abortion, U.S. support for Ukraine, and Israel's war against Hamas in Gaza.
You can see it's a number of factors. But which one is the first to be announced? The question of the economy. Yes, the economy continues to be more of a concern than all other things.
According to national polls, the race is extraordinarily close with the candidates tied, both nationally and in each of the battleground states. In that environment, every vote is needed, and Catholic voters will play a key role in deciding the next occupant of the White House. EWTN News and Real Clear Opinion research will continue to track Catholic voter attitudes through Election Day.
Well, this is what is following a lot of people every day. They're keeping an eye on who's going to win. But let's continue to see more. Putin ally predicts U.S. will collapse into imminent new civil war amid election chaos. And you know who says this? News from September 9th. Now you're going to see it.
A close ally of Vladimir Putin has predicted that the United States will collapse into an imminent new civil war amid presidential election chaos in his latest social media rant. Dmitry Medvedev, deputy chairman of the Russian Security Council and former prime minister of Russia, believes the U.S. will maintain its sanctions against the Kremlin forever or until a civil war leaves the country in ruins. Medvedev, in a Telegram message on Saturday, offered his thoughts on the U.S. presidential election, calling Democratic candidate Kamala Harris inexperienced and just stupid, and her Republican rival Donald Trump an eccentric narcissist and a pragmatist.
Well, it's interesting because it turns out that Donald Trump also similarly labels Kamala Harris. I guess you've seen it here in the United States, haven't you? Sure, there comes a point where you get to these things at the political level, speaking in these terms of the adversary. How far are you getting? Before, if you have followed what politicians did years ago, they had a diplomacy, a certain elegance. Now this has blown up. They seem more like talk show hosts of any TV program that serves to idiotize people. In short, and not serious politicians. But that is how it is working. Dmitry Medvedev, you know that he was also as president in Russia, and he is still the one who is next to Putin in practically everything, has made many predictions about the world in general, especially in consideration of the problem with Russia. And in some, more or less, he has been right. In others, not yet, or not quite right. But you see, here he does predict an imminent new civil war in the U.S. And what would that matter to him? Well, there are U.S. sanctions against Russia, and he says they will last until a civil war leaves the United States. That's when they can leave them alone, you know? When you start analyzing the prophecy, you shuffle all these opinions because they are issues that you already raised saying, we know about Gog and Magog. We presented, I don't know if there were 12 or 13 issues about it, and there we saw how Russia is going to do something, is going to get to attack Israel. Netanyahu also said it. He was clear about it. The Old Testament says that Russia will attack Israel. And now Medvedev is saying this. How is all this going to happen? For Russia to get to Israel, there must be something that prevents Russia from getting there or not. There is a country in between. It is Turkey. Between Russia and Israel is Turkey. We already saw also a whole thematic of Turkey's role in the final prophecy. We also saw how the Adventist pioneers talked about this whole issue. But if civil war begins in the United States, could it come to pass that Israel is left alone, without strong support to do what it wants to do? If that happens before or after the Third Temple, how does it all work? There are things we still don't quite know, and there are things that we accept by prophecy and believe by faith. We know it is going to happen, but how? Exactly, step by step, we do not know. That is why we have to continue to be aware of everything that is happening. But we can already see, roughly speaking, and each time in more detail, the evolution so that everything will be fulfilled as prophesied. And this is what the Adventist pioneers have done throughout their history during the first years of Adventism, to be attentive to everything that happened daily at a political level, because it was transcendental for prophecy. We must continue to do the same. Look how it continues.
Trump understands that sanctions damage the dollar's dominance in the world. However, that is not reason enough to organize a revolution in the United States and go against the anti-Russian line of the notorious deep state, which is much stronger than any Trump, he said, before taking aim at Harris.
Notice that Medvedev also knows something, evidently. He's talking about the notorious deep state, that is, the government that is behind the shadows of the government that everybody knows about here. There are some powers behind it.
But what about Harris? No surprises are to be expected from her. She's inexperienced and, according to her enemies, just plain stupid. They will prepare for her beautiful, meaningless speeches and boring, correct answers to questions, which she will read on a teleprompter while laughing infectiously. Medvedev, suggesting once again that the U.S. was on the brink of destruction, concluded, there were sanctions against the USSR throughout the 20th century, and they have returned on an unprecedented scale in the 21st century. So, sanctions are forever, or rather, until the U.S. collapses during an impending new civil war. After all, Hollywood makes movies on this subject for a reason.
Interesting analysis from Medvedev. Look where, he says imminent new civil war, but he also adds what Hollywood is conveying. And we've seen that Hollywood is doing something, and it's talking about civil war in the United States. Well, by the way, there are people, and this is the case of Russia, who are going so far as to say the same thing that we have said. And does it mean that we are Russian communists? No, it is simply an analysis of what is there. Look now. News of September 10th. According to a recent poll, the Jewish community in the United States prefers Kamala Harris over Donald Trump, 68% to 25%. That's a lot of difference. And the Jewish community, you see how much weight it carries. One more. Evangelicals unite around a statement that hopes to combat polarization with revivalism. Does this word ring a bell? Perhaps in Adventist and general religious circles they call it a revival on a spiritual level. I see this statement as a very important call to teaching, said Richard Mouw, theologian and former president of Fuller Theological Seminary, who signed a statement urging evangelicals to reject political idolatry. September 10th.
A group of evangelical Christians hoping to reclaim their tradition from the culture wars called Monday, September 9, for a broader understanding of evangelicalism, urging rejection of political idolatry and its messengers, as well as the false idols of power, wealth, and strength in place of the true God. The effort, titled Our Confession of Evangelical Conviction, is set forth in a new religious statement unveiled last week, signed by a number of evangelical pastors and leaders. We reject the false teaching that anyone other than Jesus Christ has been anointed by God as our Savior, or that a Christian's allegiance must belong to any political party, reads part of the confession. The other convictions listed in the document include giving allegiance to Jesus Christ alone, leading with love and not fear, submitting to the truth of Scripture, believing that the gospel heals all worldly division, committing to the prophetic mission of the church, and valuing each person as created in the image of God. We pray that God's Spirit will revive our church and strengthen Christ's people to be agents of His presence and blessing in this turbulent age, the document concludes. Several of the signatories said political polarization and culture wars are driving evangelicals away from the tradition, and some are abandoning the term evangelical altogether. But Christina Edmondson, former Dean of Intercultural Student Development at Calvin College, insisted on a broader view of evangelicalism and pointed to two historically Black denominations, the Church of God in Christ and the Progressive National Baptist Convention, which have also endorsed the confession.
Well, look how they talk about revival. What does this mean? They see that there are certain evangelicals who are moving away from certain guidelines that are key to the Protestant world. And they happen to talk about revival. What does the Adventist Church say about this? It also speaks of a revival before the end. Is there going to be one? Yes. There is going to be. Yes. Whether it will be within the church is another thing. There will be some inside, most of them. You see where we have to be, right? But we are seeing how they are talking about revival also at the evangelical level. Evangelical churches, and a church revival means a return to what? To faith, to morals. Therefore, when we take the prophecies, they tell us that the papacy, fabulous power, through what precisely will it take that power? Through morality. Therefore, although there will be evangelicals who will accept the message of the fourth angel, and there will be, and many as well as Catholics, most of them will work for a revival that will pressure the rulers for a return to morality, and then you know what is coming. Sunday law and persecution. For these news that we can sometimes read, and that we would not relate to this whole issue, have directly an absolute implicit relationship. That is why we must be attentive to the news, because in the details we can take the pieces of the puzzle that form the whole picture. News also from September 11th. Harris manages to unsettle an uncomfortable Trump on issues like abortion and leaderships. The most tense clashes have been on issues like abortion, immigration, and leaderships in the first and expected head-to-head between the two candidates. I don't know if those of you who live in the United States followed them from here. This was also echoed where we live, and all the media came to say that Trump had lost, that Mrs. Harris had practically crushed him. Then we saw how he said that he did not want a second round of conversation, of debate, because as he says that he had not lost, it is the losers who would ask for that. Well, that's the situation. Automatically, between this and everything that Harris was raising in funds, it was making Harris was already starting to outraise Donald Trump. Again, it was getting even, and a hell of a lot more even, and a tie between one and the other in the event of a vote. What do you think can happen? If one wins, they can say, well, he has won lawfully, is what can happen more easily when we have already seen in other issues that they said what they would do, that they would not accept that the other had won. Therefore, conflict, to put it mildly. Vatican issues special stamp to commemorate 40 years of diplomatic relations with the U.S. It was September 12th. 40 years of diplomatic relations with the United States. Diplomatic, but had they had relations before? Stay tuned, because you are going to see some description here that many people may not even know why it was born, but others may remember.
To commemorate the 40th anniversary of diplomatic relations between the Holy See and the United States of America, the Governorate of Vatican City State will issue a special postage stamp. The initiative, which will be presented at the Holy See Press Office next week by Cardinal Fernandez Vergez, is being carried out by the Postal and Philatelic Service of the Vatican's Directorate of Telecommunications and Information Systems. Laura Hochla, Chargé d'Affaires of the Embassy of the United States of America to the Holy See, will also participate in the presentation, scheduled for September 16th. Also present will be Sister Raffaella Petrini, Secretary General of the Governatorato, and Engineer Antonio Intersimone, Director of the Directorate of Telecommunications and Information Systems, as well as the new head of the Postal and Philatelic Service, Felice Bruno. The stamp depicts the coats of arms of the Holy See and the United States, mixed in turn by ribbons evoking their respective flags. The stamp will also bear the inscription, 40th Anniversary of Diplomatic Relations between the Holy See and the United States of America, Posta Vatican, and Diamissiones 1609-24. It should be noted that relations between the two states have been complex and have evolved over the years. The 19th century was marked by great mistrust on the part of the United States, which at that time had a Protestant majority and a marked differentiation between church and state, diplomatic relations that were formally established in 1984 with Ronald Reagan as president.
Did you notice what happened? There was a year when there was a president of the United States, Ronald Reagan, who made these deals with the papacy. And do you remember, doing a little bit of history, what happened precisely with that agreement that they had? Here, those of you who are not old enough to have lived through those years, perhaps you will not remember it, or you will not know it. We showed it in conference when it happened so many years ago. It turns out that they are already saying publicly when the Berlin Wall is going to fall. Do you remember the Berlin Wall that separated democratic Germany from communist Germany, and that one belonged to Russia and the other did not? It was on TV a few days before that happened. I will always remember it. Who knows when the Berlin Wall will fall? It is something that looks very far away. After 15 days, the Berlin Wall fell. Everyone was surprised. Then they said publicly that it was thanks to the previous conversations that Ronald Reagan had had with Pope John Paul II that, through the syndicate, look where, Syndicate Hay made by Catholics, Solidarity, they made the Berlin Wall fall. The world believed that that could not happen easily, but 15 days later, it happened. So, 40th anniversary of diplomatic relations. But that was already being dealt with before. It says here that the 19th century was marked by distrust on the part of many Protestants in the United States toward the Roman Catholic Church and therefore toward the Vatican. And we saw how Ellen White wrote this. But Ellen White was not the only one, the prophetess that people now label as anti-Catholic. We have already seen that she was not anti-Catholic of the people, but of the belief of the papal power. That is another story. But we have to remember something. It happened that on a certain day, many years ago, the most emblematic personage that this country, the United States, has ever had, the most emblematic of all, Abraham Lincoln, was assassinated in a theater. He was shot treacherously while he was seated, and the person who fired the shot jumped up and ran out of the box. He fled, and it turns out that through investigations, it could be proven that he was a Jesuit. Who wanted to destroy the United States from that time on? Rome. There was still a lot of anti-papal sentiment, of course. Of course there was. And Abraham Lincoln paid the price. He sure did. But lo and behold, how things have changed, so that years later the papacy and the United States are now hand in hand. When you read the statements of the former Jesuit Alberto Rivera, who was also assassinated, you can imagine how, at whose hands, he openly declared all these questions about the Jesuits, how they were working to destroy the United States. But let's see more statements. Charles Chiniquy. Do you know who Charles Chiniquy is? Charles Chiniquy was a Catholic priest in Canada, of French origin, obviously, from the Quebec area. He there began to see what the Jesuits were really doing, how we're plotting the destruction, even of the United States. He had a hard time, so much so that there came a time when there was a man who had to defend him in court. Do you know his name? Abraham Lincoln, who was his own lawyer. And Abraham Lincoln told him one day, "You can imagine the situation, and that the day the world found out that the Civil War in the United States, the one that took place in the 19th century, was caused by the Jesuits, what a mess it was going to be. The world did not know about it. It was covered up as they wanted. The South of the United States was induced to make that war. Did they achieve their objective? No, they failed. God put restrictions for the North to win, and we see in Ellen White's writings impressive manifestations of angels being with the Northerners that made the advance of the Southerners stop to such an extent that the North won, to such an extent that everything that is going to happen now could not have happened before. The Lord did not allow it. Otherwise, Rome would have sunk the United States, and the United States would have been totally papal by now. But now they are one step away from achieving it. Alberto Rivera himself, and other authors, speak of how the Vatican was already allied with the United States, and was its military partner since the Korean War. That was many years ago. And each time they have gone further and further, to the point they have reached now, where you can see the importance of Catholicism in the United States and everything they are moving and will do. And all this, unfortunately, very few people get to comment on it. Let's continue. Trump supporters drive lack of high confidence in electoral process in 6 battleground states, CNN polls show. September 13th. Notice? They drive the lack of high confidence in the electoral process. What does this mean? If they lose, what will they say? What did they say last time? That the votes had been manipulated. Verifiable or not verifiable, some say yes, others say no. The point is that the controversy is not a matter of trust in the electoral process. The fact is that the controversy was already served, and now the same thing is happening again. In a second time that this happens again, do you think that everything will remain as if nothing happened, or a big mess will be made? The postage stamp for the 40th anniversary of diplomatic relations between the Holy See and the United States of America was unveiled. It was September 16th. Did we see before that they were going to do it? Well, yes, they did.
40 years of diplomatic relations between the Holy See and the United States of America is not a point of arrival, but rather a stage on the road of friendship and collaboration. To commemorate the anniversary, the Postal and Philatelic Service of the Governorate of Vatican City State has issued a postage stamp, which was officially unveiled on Monday morning, September 16th, in the conference room of the Vatican Museums. For the occasion, a special die emissionist postmark was also prepared, which reproduces the coats of arms of the Holy See and of the United States of America. The postmark is completed by the inscriptions, 40th of diplomatic relations between the Holy See and the United States of America, Poste Vatican, and Die Emissionis, 1609, 2024. Cardinal Fernando Vergez Alzaga, President of the Governorate, and Mrs. Laura Hochla, Chargée d'Affaires ad interim, of the Embassy of the United States of America to the Holy See, unveiled the enlarged reproduction of the postage stamp and applied the first special postmark. In her speech, Mrs. Hochla emphasized that it was on January 10, 1984, when President Ronald Reagan and Pope John Paul II decided to establish formal diplomatic relations. The United States opened an embassy to the Holy See on April 9, 1984. In reality, our relations go back much further.
They tell it to you plainly, huh? They go back much further.
He then noted that the United States has maintained consular relations with the Papal States since 1797. Today, the United States and the Holy See continue to cooperate on numerous global issues, such as the protection of migrants and refugees, interfaith dialogue, conflict resolution, including the promotion of a just and lasting peace in Ukraine, and the protection and defense of the environment against climate change. The defense of human rights, the promotion of social justice, and the protection of the rights of vulnerable populations are the basis of this cooperative relationship, a relationship that is growing ever stronger.
It is interesting. This relationship is getting stronger and stronger. It is not getting less, it is getting more and more. And it is so clearly recognized that it is hard to understand that people do not realize how they are falling into the trap.
In this sense, observed Mrs. Hochla, the commemorative stamp made by the Postal and Philatelic Service of the Governorate of the Vatican City State is a symbol of the long friendship and close collaboration that unites our two countries.
It could not be better defined than in this sentence.
The meeting, moderated by Barbara Jada, director of the Directorate of Museums and Cultural Heritage, was attended by Sister Raffaella Petrini, Secretary General of the Governorate, Engineer Antonio Intersimone, Director of the Directorate of Telecommunications and Information Systems, and the head of the Post and Philatelic Service Office, Don Felice Bruno of the Sons of Divine Providence, Orionine Sons. Mrs. Hochla was accompanied by a delegation that included, among others, Stuart Smith, head of International Postal Affairs of the United States Department of State, At the end of the conference, the participants visited the Anima Mundi Museum, where Dr. Romina Cometti gave an explanation of the North American collection. The following is the speech of the Cardinal President. Speech by Cardinal Fernando Vergés Alzaga, President of the Governorate of the Vatican City State, on the occasion of the philatelic issue for the 40th anniversary of diplomatic relations between the Holy See and the United States of America on September 16th in the conference room of the Vatican Museum. First of all, I greet Mrs. Laura Hochla, Chargée d'Affaires of the Embassy of the United States of America to the Holy See, and with her the American diplomatic delegation. I greet Sister Raffaella Petrini and Attorney Giuseppe Puglisi Alibrandi, respectively Secretary General and Deputy Secretary General of the Governorate of Vatican City State, Engineer Antonio Intersimone, Director of the Directorate of Telecommunications and Information Systems, and Don Felice Bruno, Head of the Postal and Philatelic Service Office. I take this opportunity to recall with gratitude Mr. Francesco Mazzatelli, former Deputy Head of the Service and author of this philatelic issue.
Well, as in any good presentation, first they make a diplomacy to give the approvals that have led to all this to go into the subject.
To Dr. Barbara Giada, our thanks for welcoming us today at the Vatican Museums. It was on April 9, 1984, when St. John Paul II, in his address to the first ambassador of the United States of America, His Excellency William Wilson, emphasized that, with the establishment of diplomatic relations, a historic moment was being lived. The friendly relations which have long existed between the United States and the Holy See, said the pontiff, assume today a new and special form. Diplomatic relations now come to formalize, in the usual forms which regulate official relations in the international community, a relationship of close collaboration which has already borne fruit for not a few years.
They say it clearly. It has borne fruit for quite a few years, therefore for many years.
Today we remember this historic event with a commemorative stamp. The choice to dedicate a philatelic issue to the anniversary is undoubtedly a sign of the attention and importance that the Holy See and the Vatican City State attach to these diplomatic relations. In fact, entrusting a stamp with the celebration of an event is like producing a small object of art that will go around the world and convey the message entrusted to it as a kind of manifesto. I am grateful to the Directorate of Telecommunications and Information Systems, who created the stamp.
Therefore, this seal is much more than just any seal. It is a whole message for the world to grasp something that Bible prophecy says. How long ago was the prophecy written? At least 2,000 years ago, right? What did John write in Revelation about the first and second beast? How they would go hand in hand, and how one would give total power to the other. It is right before your eyes. For me, and for any prophecy connoisseur, to see this is breathtaking. There are no words to describe it.
Certainly, diplomatic relations between the United States of America and the Vatican has its roots not in A 1984, but from 1788, when George Washington had Pius VI communicate, through Benjamin Franklin, that in the new republic no permission was needed for the appointment of a bishop by the Holy See.
Notice, they were talking about what does not happen in China. Because if in China they want to appoint a new bishop, they have to ask permission from the Chinese government, not in the United States. There they were starting to totally avoid that there could be a tension between them. They were opening the gap for them to do what they are doing now and what they will do.
Since then, a long road has been traveled that has led to the full diplomatic relations that we enjoy today, at the basis of which there are some common principles, such as shared values and the spirit of goodwill.
Yes, that's funny because the two people you named before, George Washington and Benjamin Franklin, belonged to Freemasonry. What a thing!
For the Vatican City State, this collaboration means engaging with all forces in the defense of human dignity and the rights of every person, in the commitment to the protection of freedom, the promotion of justice, and the defense of truth.
Interesting, isn't it? Commitment to what? To the protection of freedom, the promotion of justice, the defense of truth. And all this is associated with the Vatican and the United States? Wow!
Collaboration that is carried out to carry out dialogue and promote peace, and the search for all means to put an end to conflicts. Pope Francis, on Thursday, September 24, 2015, in Washington, D.C., during a visit to the Congress of the United States of America, delivered an address to the plenary assembly. On that occasion, he stressed, among other things, that a nation is considered great when it defends freedom, as Abraham Lincoln did. When it generates a culture that allows its people to dream of full rights for their brothers and sisters, as Martin Luther King tried to do. When it fights for justice and the cause of the oppressed, as Dorothy Day did in her unceasing work. Being the fruit of a faith that becomes dialogue and sows peace. In the contemplative style of Merton, 4 representatives of the American people who express in the best way the spirit of freedom and social commitment that characterizes your country.
How interesting, because knowing what we know, it says, a nation is considered great when it defends freedom, as Abraham Lincoln did. It is necessary to add, which is why we assassinated him. It sounds like a laugh, but it is terrible. It is hypocrisy at its finest. Then, in addition, he quotes Martin Luther King, who you know everything that was behind him. And there is no mention of any of that here. It is true that he did important things, but about what was behind him, silence. In short, you can see the way he works. Does what we have read before, in the great controversy, ring a bell? One thing in front, another thing behind. They are still the same.
I would like to conclude my intervention with the same words of St. John Paul II in his address to the first American ambassador, because I believe they are still relevant today. My prayer is that the United States will not decline in itself and will renew its identity and fidelity to moral and religious principles, and in service to a world in need of peace and human rights, a world hungry for bread and thirsty for justice and fraternal love.
I go back because you have strongly pronounced this, and I want to emphasize it. You go so far as to say, my prayer is that America will not decline into itself and renew its identity in fidelity to moral and religious principles. How? Moral and religious? But do we realize what they are saying? But if it returns to fidelity to moral and religious principles, they would kick Catholicism out of those lands. Do you realize? What a political way of saying things, to twist everything.
It is defining the return to morality.
And it is spoken in prophecy that this is going to happen.
With these sentiments, Mr. Ambassador, the Holy Father said, I ask God to assist you in your mission, and I invoke His blessings on the President and on all the people of the United States of America.
Well, notice that he also said something interesting. Revive a world in need of peace and human rights, a world hungry for bread and thirsty for justice and fraternal love. Why do you think they will give power to the papacy? Because it is going to theoretically represent the salvation of all those rights, and so on. That's why it's going to get the power. And lo and behold, you see who is going to give it to him. Here you have pictures precisely of that stamp event. Here you see it up close. Really, if you see this and you know the prophecy written so many years ago, I don't even know what words of exclamation to express when you see it. It is impressive, really impressive. Notice how the Vatican flag, yellow and white, is joined with the flag of the United States. It becomes an absolute union. It is impressive.
There is a very interesting numerology, I think, in the seal, because you see that it says 245. If you add it up, it is 11, 4 and 5, 9 and 2. 11. It is like blessed by divine law. In this case, it would not be. It would be the other law. But notice that it is 40 years, right? That is the test. It is also very strong. It is like making an apology to Christ also in his 40 days.
This makes you think, why didn't they do it on the 30th anniversary? If they did it on the 40th anniversary, it's for a reason, isn't it? You know, when you follow Catholic writings, as I do every day, they talk a lot about the 40th and all its meaning. And of course, you realize why they use precisely that number of years. Really, for them, it is very important. They take the biblical similarity of certain things to apply it to themselves. In other words, the height of satanic mockery of the truth. Here you can see more pictures of that event. Everyone so happy. They also show the postmark. Here you see it big. Everyone signing happy and content to work to sink America. Yes, yes, just as you hear it. They are working to bring down God's people, just like you see. The world sees this, and they are so happy. How many media outlets have echoed this? Have you seen it anywhere here? Have you not? Neither have I in Spain. I only know this because I go to the Vatican websites every day. Otherwise, I would not have known about it. But the work is being done.
Sorry to interrupt you again. If you look at the stamp that is being shown, you see on one side the United States, and on the other side the Vatican. And on the United States seal, you see the eagle, you see the six-pointed stars, you see everything that comes out on the dollar bill, which is basically Freemasonry and the Illuminati power that unites the two. The Triple Alliance. The Triple Alliance, which is a prophecy that Ellen White defines as such, is really impressive. It is like something that is marking the time. I think this seal really marks the time for us too, isn't it?
And I think that the copy of this stamp, joining one thing with the other, is something that we should do to put in the museum. Now that we are finishing it, and once it is all completed, we will show you, if you can't come and visit it. Because you will see that there we are also giving the message through objects that are giving meridian clarity to the biblical prophecy. So we have a little more work to do. Well, more pictures of the event. One more piece of news. September 16th. What is known about the assassination attempt against Donald Trump in Palm Beach, Florida? Yes, there was a second attempt. Once again it is said, but he was already prepared or not prepared. As you know, all the theories come out and more. But once again, this was tantamount to saying that Donald Trump was being saved by God continually. Therefore, he is a chosen one to do something. The message is sticking, eh? It's sticking.
The former U.S. president and Republican candidate for the presidential elections, Donald Trump, has suffered this Sunday a new assassination attempt when a man who has been stopped by the Secret Service before he could shoot has approached the golf course in West Palm Beach, Florida, where the New York magnate was playing armed with an AK-47 rifle with telescopic sight. The Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, has confirmed that the incident is being investigated as an apparent assassination attempt. The incident has occurred nearly 2 months after Trump survived a shooting at a rally in Butler, Pennsylvania, in which the Republican candidate was shot in the ear and one of his supporters was killed.
Well, here you go, too. Trump accuses Democrats of second assassination attempt over communist rhetoric. Everything is being used for anything. The point is to be able to win. And here's the detainee in question.
Trump blames the Democrats in a post on social media, as well as in written statements to Fox News. The Republican candidate has used this incident to blame his Democratic rival, Kamala Harris, and her party for the 2 assassination attempts he has experienced lately. Because of this communist leftist rhetoric, bullets are flying, and it's only going to get worse.
What he is saying is very strong, and it will only get worse. In other words, He's already painting a picture of what's in store, isn't he?
The message, posted on Truth Social, his own social network, also blames immigration and insists on closing borders. Even though Ryan Ruth, the detainee, is a white American man born in North Carolina. Thomas Crooks, who shot him during a rally in July, also white, was from Pennsylvania.
But you see, anything goes to make a point, don't you? It's unbelievable. Anyway, it is hard for people to understand that, seeing the candidates and everything they say, they do not tell them, "Here you stay, we totally ignore you," because they go from one to the other. But look where. Donald Trump could visit the Basilica of Guadalupe. Wow. What a thing, huh? September 16th. This was revealed by Mexican actor and activist Eduardo Verástegui, of whom we were also showing things in conferences, through his account in X on September 8th, stating that Trump wants to bring flowers to the Virgin of Guadalupe, a significant gesture that has caught the attention of believers and media alike. He talks all the time about immigrants, and now he wants to do this? What a thing, right?
The former president of the United States, Donald Trump, has shown interest in making a special visit to Mexico, specifically to the Basilica of Guadalupe, one of the most important shrines of Catholicism in America. This was revealed by Mexican actor and activist Eduardo Verástegui through his X account, formerly Twitter, on September 8th, stating that Trump wishes to bring flowers to the Virgin of Guadalupe, a significant gesture that has captured the attention of believers and media alike. Verastegui's comment comes after Trump posted on his social networks an image of the Virgin of Guadalupe wishing her a happy birthday on the same date. For the Catholic Church, September 8th is a special date as it celebrates the birth of the Virgin Mary, one of the few birthday holidays in its liturgical calendar. A new chapter in Trump's faith. Donald Trump's relationship with faith and religion has had an interesting development over the years. Although he was raised in Presbyterian doctrine, a Protestant movement that does not recognize episcopal authority, Trump revealed in 2020 that he no longer considered himself a Presbyterian, but a Christian with no specific denominational affiliation. In a statement to Religion News Service, the former president explained that, throughout his life, he has had the opportunity to meet with religious leaders from around the world, and that during the pandemic he participated in several virtual church services. This evolution in his faith seems to have brought him closer to the traditions and symbols of Catholicism, which reinforces his possible desire to visit the Basilica of Guadalupe. Although his team has not officially confirmed the details of the visit, the simple fact of his interest in visiting the shrine has already generated expectation in both Mexico and the United States. The Virgin of Guadalupe and its significance. The shrine that Trump may visit has a profound significance in Mexican history and culture. Devotion to the Virgin of Guadalupe dates back to December 12, 1531, when, according to tradition, the Virgin appeared to the indigenous Juan Diego on the Cerro del Tepeyac, an event that marked the beginning of one of the truest Marian invocations in the world. Every December 12th, millions of people make pilgrimages to the Basilica of Guadalupe to honor the Virgin, give thanks for the miracles received, and ask for her intercession in personal and family matters. This festivity transcends borders as devotees from all over the Americas and even from other parts of the world join the celebrations. Implications of the possible visit. Trump's possible visit to the Basilica of Guadalupe would not only be a symbolic act of personal devotion, but could also have an impact on his public image, especially among the Catholic community, both in the United States and Latin America. The Guadalupan devotion is a fundamental pillar of Mexican identity, and a gesture like this could be seen as an attempt of rapprochement and respect towards a tradition that transcends the religious and blends with the culture and history of Mexico. Trump, who during his term in office made religious freedom one of his priorities, has on several occasions expressed his support for believers of different faiths. In a speech to the United Nations, he stated that the United States defends the right of people to live according to the faith they hold in their hearts, underscoring the importance he places on religious freedom. Expectations of the visit. Although the details and date of the possible visit have not yet been confirmed, the news has aroused curiosity about how it will be received by Mexicans and the Catholic community. While the former president has had a tense relationship with Mexico in the past, his interest in paying homage to the Virgin of Guadalupe could be seen as a gesture of reconciliation or respect for the country's traditions. In any case, Trump's visit to the Basilica would be an unusual and significant event, both for him and for those who follow his political and personal trajectory. While more details are awaited, believers and the curious await with interest how this potential pilgrimage of the former U.S. president to the spiritual heart of Mexico will unfold.
Well, now there is so much Catholic immigration coming into the United States. Many people in Latin America, not all of them Mexican, are for the Virgin of Guadalupe. There are Catholics in other countries as well. With this, what do they get? To win over many immigrants, obviously. But above all, what are they also demonstrating? Their connection with the Vatican. Anyway, there is still another batch of news that we will present in the last part, in the next one. But now, it is our turn once again, taking up what we have seen before, to go back to the great controversy and continue where we left off. And once again I say to you, mentally collect all the news that we have presented in this saga of conferences, not only today's, but this whole series of the next U.S. Civil War, and stay tuned for what we will be reading. It is not without reason that the claim has been put forth in Protestant countries that Catholicism differs less widely from Protestantism than in former times. There used to be a big difference between the two. Now that is becoming history. There has been a change, but the change is not in the papacy. Catholicism indeed resembles much of the Protestantism that now exists, because Protestantism has so greatly degenerated since the days of the Reformers. How clearly Ellen White speaks. Protestantism is going to the dogs, and then there is no longer so much difference between Catholics and Protestants. It does not fail. So, what does this mean? Well, they are polishing things to be more united. As the Protestant churches have been seeking the favor of the world, false charity has blinded their eyes. They do not see but that it is right to believe good of all evil. And as the inevitable result, they will finally believe evil of all good. Interesting thought, isn't it? Instead of standing in defense of the faith once delivered to the saints. And it does not speak of Catholic saints, but of those who keep the commandments of God and have the faith of Jesus. They are now, as it were, apologizing to Rome for their uncharitable opinion of her, begging pardon for their bigotry. Yes, and that too, isn't it? A large class, even of those who look upon Romanism with no favor, apprehend little danger from her power and influence. Many urged that the intellectual and moral darkness prevailing during the Middle Ages favored the spread of her dogmas, superstitions, and oppression, and that the greater intelligence of modern times, the general diffusion of knowledge, and the increasing liberality in matters of religion forbid a revival of intolerance and tyranny. The very thought that such a state of things will exist in this enlightened age is ridiculed. It is true that great light, intellectual, moral, and religious, is shining upon this generation. In the open pages of God's holy word, light from heaven has been shed upon the world. But it should be remembered that the greater the light bestowed, the greater the darkness of those who pervert or reject it. A prayerful study of the Bible would show Protestants the real character of the papacy and would cause them to abhor and to shun it. But many are so wise in their own conceit that they feel no need of humbly seeking God that they may be led into the truth. Although priding themselves on their enlightenment, they are ignorant both of the Scriptures and of the power of God. They must have some means of quieting their consciences, and they seek that which is least spiritual and humiliating. What they desire is a method of forgetting God which shall pass as a method of remembering Him. The papacy is well adapted to meet the wants of all these. It is prepared for two classes of mankind, embracing nearly the whole world, those who would be saved by their merits, that is, salvation by works, and those who would be saved in their sins. Here is the secret of its power. Either you are saved by your own merits, or you are saved while retaining your sins. How funny. This is how they win them all over. It has been proved how much the periods of intellectual darkness favored the success of the papacy. It will also be demonstrated that an epoch of great intellectual lights is equally favorable to its triumph. A day of great intellectual darkness has been shown to be favorable to the success of popery. It will yet be demonstrated that a day of great intellectual light is equally favorable for its success. What do you remember from history? The Dark Ages. Of course, all superstitions, all fear, all beasts, demons, I don't know what else. And the people, full of terror. Everyone with little education. Very few were educated, so everything was a big deal to them. There, the papacy flourished like 1,000 wonders. But in our time, there are great lights, great intellectuals. Well, she says that also in this time they will manage to do the same. We are seeing it, eh? It is happening before our eyes. In past ages, when men were without God's word and without the knowledge of the truth, their eyes were blindfolded, and thousands were ensnared, not seeing the net spread for their feet. In this generation, there are many whose eyes become dazzled by the glare of human speculations, science falsely so called. They discern not the net, and walk into it as readily as if blindfolded. God designed that man's intellectual powers should be held as a gift from his Maker, and should be employed in the service of truth and righteousness. But when pride and ambition are cherished, and men exalt their own theories above the Word of God, then intelligence can accomplish greater harm than ignorance. Does this happen or not? The theory of evolution appeared, and questions appeared that threw the biblical truth to the ground. Or at least, that is what they pretended, inventing new theories about the universe, about so many things, the origin of life on earth as well. And in the end, we are in the same thing, and they are going to achieve the same goal. Thus, the false science of the 19th century, which undermines faith in the Bible, will prove as successful in preparing the way for the acceptance of the papacy with its pleasing forms, as did the withholding of knowledge in opening the way for its aggrandizement in the Dark Ages. In the movements now in progress in the United States to secure for the institutions and usages of the Church the support of the state, Protestants are following in the steps of papists. Watch out, because she is now going to say precisely how they are going to accomplish all this. Have you noticed what she is already saying? Who will support the secular institutions and practices of the Church? A movement that is spreading across the U.S. And who are they? Protestants doing this, practically joining Rome, but also following in the footsteps of the papists, following in the same footsteps. Remember what the prophecy says? How does the prophecy define this? The image of the beast. It will do the same thing that the beast did, the first beast, the papacy. Nay, more, they are opening the door for popery to regain in Protestant America the supremacy which she has lost in the Old World. Interesting, eh? And that which gives greater significance to this movement is the fact that the principal object contemplated is the enforcement of Sunday observance, a custom which originated with Rome, and which she claims as the sign of her authority. It is the spirit of the papacy, the spirit of conformity to worldly customs, the veneration for human traditions above the commandments of God, that is permeating the Protestant churches and leading them on to do the same work of Sunday exaltation which the papacy has done before them. We have been seeing it throughout all this news. If the reader would understand the agencies to be employed in the soon-coming contest, he has but to trace the record of the means which Rome employed for the same object in ages past. In other words, history will be repeated by the same means. If he would know how Papists and Protestants united will deal with those who reject their dogmas, let him see the spirit which Rome manifested toward the Sabbath and its defenders. Let them tell it to the Waldenses. Let them tell it to the Cathars. Royal edicts, general councils, and church ordinances sustained by secular power were the steps by which the pagan festival attained its position of honor in the Christian world. How did they enforce it? Could they enforce it directly? No. Who did they use? The civil power. And now, what will they do? The same? The first public measure enforcing Sunday observance was the law enacted by Constantine, AD 321. This edict required townspeople to rest on the venerable day of the sun, but permitted countrymen to continue their agricultural pursuits. You know, Sunday is the venerable day of the sun. Though virtually a heathen statute, it was enforced by the emperor after his nominal acceptance of Christianity. Therefore, through the conversion of Constantine, apparent conversion because he remained a total pagan, Satan managed to sneak the Sunday law. Already at that time, of course. The royal mandate not proving a sufficient substitute for divine authority, Eusebius, a bishop who sought the favor of princes, and who was the special friend and flatterer of Constantine, advanced the claim that Christ had transferred the Sabbath to Sunday. Yes, you know. When we started looking for data on who had moved Catholicism, one of the main ones was precisely Bishop Eusebius, the best traitor to the cause of Christ. Impressive, eh? Bishop Eusebius. And pulling the thread, you will see where it goes. Not a single testimony of the Scriptures was produced in proof of the new doctrine. Eusebius himself unwittingly acknowledges its falsity and points to the real authors of the change. But why did he do this? Constantine's intimate friend, Constantine's flatterer. Oh, how beautiful you are! How handsome! Oh, how well you do everything! Well, this was Eusebius. And why did he do all that? He also sought the favor of princes. What else did he want? Well, they sought power. And did anyone motivate Constantine to do this? We have seen before the statements of Ellen White, who speaks of this strange parallelism between those Jews, those who killed Christ, and these who generated all this. Why is that? Satan went against Christ directly and then went against his disciples. And when he could do no more with all this, everything began to germinate so that a series of characters came out who began to show within Christianity a series of doctrines that were already being manifested in the times of Paul and in the times of John. They were the Gnostics, those people who were involved in spiritualism and who made things that were not Christianity pass as Christianity. And among them, this whole question arose, and they ended up with Constantine. And that is the story that has to be explained to the world and that many people do not know. That is the origin of the Catholic Church, the Jewish Gnosticism, the same in which the Pharisees were placed. They made believe that they were very Jewish, and it turns out that they were sun worshippers. Already in the past, their ancestors put obelisks, as happened with the temple. A prophet sees in vision inside the curtain. Who does he see? Priests worshiping the sun, the obelisk. Do you understand why the Catholic Church is still like that? Because it is the satanic doctrine par excellence. They supplant the things of God, passing them off as the things of the Lord. For you see, Eusebius was excellent in achieving all this. Eusebius himself unwittingly acknowledges the falsity of it and points out the real authors of the change. All things, he says, whatsoever that it was duty to do on the Sabbath, these we have transferred to the Lord's day. And what did they worship in the old days? The sun, the obelisk, with all that it implied. Look where, the day of the Lord. Of what Lord? If it was a symbol of Lucifer, of Satan, do we see any difference with that of yore? No. But the Sunday argument, groundless as it was, served to embolden men in trampling upon the Sabbath of the Lord. All who desired to be honored by the world accepted the popular festival. As the papacy became firmly established, the work of Sunday exaltation was continued. For a time, the people engaged in agricultural labor when not attending church, and the seventh day was still regarded as the Sabbath. But steadily a change was effected. Those in holy office were forbidden to pass judgment in any civil controversy on the Sunday. Soon after, all persons, of whatever rank, were commanded to refrain from common labor, on pain of a fine for freemen, and stripes in the case of servants. Later it was decreed that rich men should be punished with the loss of half of their estates, and finally, that if still obstinate, they should be made slaves. The lower classes were to suffer perpetual banishment. Do you see what will happen to us in a few years? Miracles also were called into requisition. History is going to repeat itself, eh? Among other wonders, it was reported that as a husbandman who was about to plow his field on Sunday cleaned his plow with an iron, the iron stuck fast in his hand, and for 2 years he carried it about with him, to his exceeding great pain and shame. Later, the Pope gave directions that the parish priest should admonish the violators of Sunday, and wish them to go to church and say their prayers, lest they bring some great calamity on themselves and neighbors. Do you see? They will tell us the same thing. If you do not change, it will affect us all, because calamity will come upon us, a divine punishment. An ecclesiastical council brought forward the argument, since so widely employed, even by Protestants, that because persons had been struck by lightning while laboring on Sunday, it must be the Sabbath. It is apparent, said the prelates, how high the displeasure of God was upon their neglect of this day. An appeal was then made that priests and ministers, kings and princes, and all faithful people use their utmost endeavors and care that the day be restored to its honor, and, for the credit of Christianity, more devoutly observed for time to come. And now I go back especially so that you can see a parallelism with the text of Revelation, which prophesies that everything possible will be done so that this day will be restored to their honor. But by whom? A call for priests and ministers, kings and princes, and all the faithful, and he will forbid them to buy and sell to whom? And he starts quoting, owners, servants, one and the other. It is the same parallel. The same thing will happen. The decrees of councils proving insufficient, the secular authorities were besought to issue an edict that would strike terror to the hearts of the people and force them to refrain from labor on the Sunday. At a synod held in Rome, see, now they are precisely assembled in the Synod of Synodality. Curious, eh? All previous decisions were reaffirmed with greater force and solemnity. They were also incorporated into the ecclesiastical law and enforced by the civil authorities throughout nearly all Christendom. Still, the absence of scriptural authority for Sunday keeping occasioned no little embarrassment. The people questioned the right of their teachers to set aside the positive declaration of Jehovah, "The seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God," in order to honor the day of the sun. To supply the lack of Bible testimony, Other expedients were necessary. A zealous advocate of Sunday, who about the close of the 12th century visited the churches of England, was resisted by faithful witnesses for the truth. And so fruitless were his efforts that he departed from the country for a season and cast about him for some means to enforce his teachings. Did you know that in England in those years there were Sabbath keepers? Curious, wasn't it, the century of the Cathars and of the Waldenses? They kept the Sabbath there, and their influence reached very far. When he returned, the lack was supplied, and in his after labors he met with greater success. He brought with him a roll purporting to be from God himself, which contained the needed command for Sunday observance, with awful threats to terrify the disobedient. I wonder if at that moment his nose did not begin to grow like Pinocchio. This precious document, as base a counterfeit as the institution it supported, was said to have fallen from heaven, and to have been found in Jerusalem, upon the altar of Saint Simeon in Golgotha. But in fact, the pontifical palace at Rome was the source whence it proceeded. Frauds and forgeries to advance the power and prosperity of the Church have in all ages been esteemed lawful by the papal hierarchy. The roll forbade labor from the 9th hour, 3 o'clock, on Saturday afternoon, till sunrise on Monday, and its authority was declared to be confirmed by many miracles. It was reported that persons laboring beyond the appointed hour were stricken with paralysis. A miller who attempted to grind his corn saw, instead of flour, a torrent of blood come forth, and the mill wheel stood still, notwithstanding the strong rush of the water. A woman who placed dough in the oven found it raw when taken out, though the oven was very hot. Another who had dough prepared for baking at the 9th hour, but determined to set it aside till Monday, found, the next day, that it had been made into loaves and baked by divine power. A man who baked bread after the 9th hour on Saturday found, when he broke it the next morning, that blood started therefrom. By such absurd and superstitious fabrications did the advocates of Sunday endeavor to establish its sacredness. And they succeeded, eh? Boy, did they succeed! So for centuries and centuries and centuries. And even now, so many people hold it sacred. Well, you see where this whole Civil War situation in the United States is going to lead. We have been seeing step by step what will happen. But that's not all. There will be more. And now in the fourth part, we are going to show the rest of this writing and other news that once again, I must say, are not wasted. We will see the association with all those topics. A rest interval, and we continue with the last part.